Good evening, everyone. I am Karen Parker, Project Coordinator with the Research Centers in Minority Institutions program at Howard University College of Medicine. I am your host for this evening, and I'm joined by my colleague, Kristen Holmes, and our principal, Dr. Carla Williams. If this is your first time joining us, welcome in. And if you're returning, welcome back. And now I'm going to hand things over to Kristen to just bring you up to speed on what we do. Kristen?
Thank you, Karen, and good evening, everyone. My name is Kristen Holmes, and I am the engagement specialist on our team. Our RCMI program focuses on enhancing and developing the necessary research infrastructure that ensures Howard University's ability to contribute to the resolution of diseases that disproportionately affect underserved and minority populations. Our group, the Community Engagement Corps' primary goal is to ensure that RCMI-supported research addresses the needs and interests of our local community. To achieve this, we do three things. We partner with local community organizations to address health-related concerns. We promote community participation in research and partnership with researchers in study design and execution. And we ensure research findings are shared with relevant communities. That's why tonight's conversation with you is critical to our work. This core is led by Dr. Carla Williams. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kristen. If you would kindly just advance the slide to the 6 R's. I just wanted to briefly let everyone know that another of the reasons that we hold these discussions is to bring research conversations forward in our communities. So we use this image that you see before you to highlight the following ideas in the event that you are considering participating in a research study. As you can see, we call it the 6 R's of research. And the first R is about representation. If you're considering participating in a clinical trial, you want to know whether the research will include people like yourself. The second R is regulation. Are the methods that are being employed in the research, are they ethical? And will you be protected as a participant? The next R, replication. If we do this study in other places or with other populations, will it produce the same types of results? The next R is rigor, which means do the results represent what is really happening in the community? Review is if other experts review it, will they view it as significant and is the data of a high quality? And the last R is relevance. How will this research that's being done affect your day-to-day? Thanks very much. And now I can tell you that we actually have an active study that's happening right here at RCMI. It is a survey, and by virtue of your participation in this evening's call, you are invited and you are eligible to participate. It is supported by our RCMI team, and it is funded through a grant from the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. If you have any questions, as you can see at the bottom of the flyer, you can contact me at the phone number below, or you can email us at rcmicec@howard.edu. We will place all relevant information in the chat coming up. We will return at the end of the call to give you the link. It is an online survey. As you can see, it is non-invasive. You can fill it out in the comfort of your own home. And the purpose of the study is to help us to understand what's important to you and your life beyond COVID-19, and to help us find the best ways to share information. And now I am happy to welcome back our speaker for the evening. This is part one of our two-part series on the care and nurturing of our melanated skin and hair. So this evening we're going to talk, we'll be guided by Dr. Okoye, who is no stranger to the roundtable. She is a researcher, a clinician, a professor, and the chair of dermatology at Howard University College of Medicine. And her areas of expertise are in skin disorders that disproportionately affect people with pigmented skin. And those include scarring alopecia, hidradenitis suppurativa, all kinds of things. And we are just so happy to have you back, Dr. Okoye. As you can see here, she's also on the research committee for the Skin of, on the research committee for the Skin of Color Society. And she is on the editorial boards of the Journal of the National Medical Association and the British Journal of Dermatology. So without any further ado, I hand everything over to you, Dr. Okoye. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. Thank you, Karen, Kristen, and Dr. Williams, of course. Today, we're going to be talking about summer skincare, how to keep your glow. So let's see if I can share my screen here. And I got this fancy title slide with this moving water and the breeze. Can you feel it? You know, it just made me feel so relaxed looking at the screen. I thought I'd share it with you guys. So we're going to talk about summer skincare. As Karen mentioned, this is the first part in a two-part series. My colleague, Dr. Shoshana Kindred, will be doing the second part. She'll be talking about hair care, hairstyling, etc. So I know you all will be excited about that. That'll be in June. But what we'll be talking about today, first, I want to touch on the structure of the skin and function of the skin, just so we talk a little biology of the skin so you understand the recommendations that I make later on. And then we'll focus in on the two things that I think are most important during the summer: ultraviolet light or sunlight exposure, and sweating or excessive sweating. So let's start with the structure of the skin. This is a nice cartoon that really breaks it down in a digestible way. The skin has three layers. The top layer here is the epidermis, and the very top of the epidermis is the part of the skin that you can see. The second layer is called the dermis. That's really the meat of the skin, so to speak. That's where your skin gets its tightness, its youth. That's where your collagen is, the thing that we're always trying to build. But within your dermis, you also have your blood vessels, your nerve endings, your sweat glands, your oil glands, all the things that we really need to make our skin function well. And then the third level is the subcutaneous layer or the fat layer. That's where your skin stores fat. And it's actually a really important layer for a couple of reasons. One, that's where your hair starts. So the root of the hair follicle is deep in the skin, down in the subcutaneous layer. And you'll learn more about that next month. But the other thing is that this fat layer is a cushion. It's protective for the organs since it provides basically a shock absorbing capacity for your skin. So now that you know a little bit about the structure of the skin, I would love for you guys to put in the chat or unmute if you don't mind. What do you think the functions of the skin are? What do you think? So I mentioned one, which is sort of like shock absorbing, protection from injury for your internal organs. What else? I see something in the chat here. Anybody? Protection from microbes. Thank you, Taylor Lofton. Yes, exactly. So your skin is basically a barrier to protect you from bacteria, viruses, etc., that would otherwise be bombarding your organs. Very good. Let's see what else I have here on my slide. Let's see, hang on. So Taylor, you got that one. Infection, I gave you guys the injury one. The other thing the skin protects you from is extremes of temperature. And that's where sweat comes in, and we'll talk about that. And the skin basically protects you from ultraviolet light. It helps you to regulate your body temperature. It's a storage organ. You store water and you store fat in your skin. And very importantly, and we'll talk about this later, your skin with sun exposure creates vitamin D. And your skin contains nerves that sense painful stimuli and pleasant touch. So for example, if you touch a hot pot on the stove, you'll immediately get a sensation that this is hot, you'll let go. If you didn't get that sensation, let's say you had neuropathy, for example, you would hold on to that pot and get a pretty bad burn. So those nerve endings in the skin are really important to protect us. And of course, it's nice to feel the touch of someone else, to get a hug. And it's the nerve endings in your skin that allow you to experience those pleasant sensations as well. So let's zoom in a little bit into the epidermis, because I want to talk about the difference, the main difference between white skin and skin that has more pigment in it. And in general, the structure and the function of the skin, it's the same, no matter what color your skin is. But there's one really big difference. So here's your epidermis. We zoomed in on the epidermis. It's made up of multiple layers of skin. This is the bottom layer. It's called the basal layer. And every layer above that, the cells are either dead or dying. That's just how the skin functions. The only live, truly live cells are at the bottom here. And as they move up, they slough off. It takes about 2 weeks from your skin cells to go from this basal layer up to this level, and then another 2 weeks for it to slough off into the atmosphere. So your skin is constantly renewing itself. But down here in this basal layer, this bottom layer of the skin, these cells are called skin cells or keratinocytes, but every now and then you get a special cell in blue here in this cartoon called a melanocyte. So your melanocyte, that is the cell that creates melanin. Now, whether you are white, black, or somewhere in between, you have the same number of melanocytes, which is kind of interesting, right? We're all so similar. We're more similar than different. We all have the same number of melanocytes, but if you have brown skin, you just have more melanin within that melanocyte. Your melanocytes are more active. They create more of these melanin little globules you see here. And the melanocyte, you see how it has these little projections coming from it, little fingers. Those fingers, if you have brown skin, they extend throughout the epidermis and they transport that melanin throughout the entire epidermis. Whereas if you have white skin and you have less melanin, the melanin just doesn't go all the way through the epidermis. It really stays very close to the bottom layer of the skin. And there was this nice study done a few years ago that I'm going to walk you through, where they wanted to see the differences between 3 groups of people: white patients, Asian patients, and Black patients. They wanted to see what do the melanocytes do with your melanin with sun exposure. So the panel on the left is basically a biopsy of the skin before the investigators gave a dose of sunlight to the participants. So you could see here in the white patient, this is a biopsy of the skin. I just want to orient you. This pink, the darker pink layer is the epidermis. Down at the bottom layer of the epidermis, just like in the cartoon, you see some brown spots. That's melanin. And this is a white patient, and you can see they have melanin at the basal layer, but it's pretty much limited to that area. Here is a patient of Asian ancestry, and you could see in the basal layer, they have more melanin than the white patient. And then the Black patient, the Black participant in this study, has even more melanin in the basal layer of the epidermis. But look, there is melanin throughout the epidermis. You see these little brown and black dots here? And look at the top layer of the skin. That's the part of the skin that sloughs off all the time. Even that has melanin in it. If you've ever taken an alcohol swab and wiped your skin or had someone do that to draw blood and it was brown, it's not because your skin was dirty. That's melanin that's just hanging out in the top layers of your epidermis. Okay, so let's look at this second panel here. This is what happened 7 days after they administered a very specific dose of sunlight to a part of the participant's skin. And the amount of sunlight they administered was equivalent to sitting in the sun for about an hour. And what they saw was, of course, in the white patient, the melanocytes responded. That's what they're supposed to do. They sense ultraviolet light, they start beefing up the melanin production to protect your growing cells in that basal layer. And so the white patient, they got a little bit more melanin here, but look at the Asian patient, look at the Black patient, look at how much melanin was created in response to a little bit of sun exposure, and look at how it fills up the epidermis in both groups, but more so in the Black patient. Look at the sternum corneum, that's the top layer of the skin that's actually dead and sloughing off, full of melanin, really creating almost like an umbrella over your dividing and alive cells in the basal layer here. So what have we learned from studies like that? We've learned that white skin contains less melanin in the upper layers of the epidermis. You just saw that demonstrated nicely. And what that means is up to 5 times the amount of ultraviolet light reaches the deeper layers of the skin in patients with white skin, or even patients with Black skin who are very light complexion, we'll talk about that, compared to patients with more pigment. So what does that mean? It means that brown skin is a very efficient filter of ultraviolet light. As a matter of fact, if you have my complexion or darker, you have a natural SPF of 13. And you can go to the store and buy a cream with SPF 15. So that tells you how effective your natural pigment is at filtering out the sun. And so, why does this matter? You've heard black don't crack, right? It does crack. It just cracks later. So people with a lot of pigment develop wrinkles and fine lines on the skin later in life compared to people with lighter skin. However, because that melanin is so active and prone to be distributed throughout the epidermis, with sun exposure, you can get an uneven skin tone. So your skin can become darker in some spots, lighter in some spots, because that melanin is being produced in a somewhat haphazard way. So here's a nice comparison. This is from one of my colleagues up at Hopkins who does research on skin aging. And so they did a study on aging, and he just shared these photos with me. These are 2 participants who are around the same age and they have the same occupation, which is really important because you can't really compare in a skin aging study, say a farmer and somebody who works in an office, because naturally the farmer is getting more sun exposure than the person in the office. So they had similar occupation, similar age. One was white, one was Black. And you can see the difference. The participant who was white had deeper lines and wrinkles, but the Black patient had more fine lines. He didn't have any of those deep wrinkles yet. He may have developed them later in life, but you could see the uneven pigmentation, right? You could see his face is a little bit lighter in the central part of the face, a little darker along the temples and the lateral cheeks. And you can see little brown spots all over his forehead. So that's one of the ways that brown skin shows sun damage or aging, is sort of mottled pigmentation, uneven pigmentation, and very fine lines compared to white skin. Some other conditions that we tend to see with uneven skin tone because of sun exposure, and especially in brown skin, is melasma. So melasma is a condition that's caused by sun exposure plus estrogen. And so it's much more common in women. It tends to occur often in pregnancy, or if you're on oral contraceptive pills, and you get this blotchy pigmentation on the cheeks, the forehead, even the backs of the arms. And if you didn't get any sun exposure, you would not have melasma. The sun is directly causing your melanocytes to do something strange in response to that sun exposure. Another issue with uneven pigmentation and sun exposure in brown skin is, if you have brown skin, if you have a pimple, that pimple may last 2 days, but the brown spot it leaves behind will last 2 months. That's called post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. And what happens in post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation is the inflammation in the epidermis. Remember, we saw that the melanocytes were at that bottom layer of the skin. If the inflammation disrupts that bottom layer, that melanocyte and its melanin will drop deeper into the skin, and they'll just hang out there until your body decides to clear them. That's post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. If you are getting a lot of sun exposure, that pigmentation will last a lot longer compared to somebody who is wearing sunscreen and so on. So why else is this filtering of light important in brown skin? Well, it also means that people with brown skin are much less likely to get skin cancer from sun exposure compared to people with white skin. I didn't say brown people cannot get skin cancer. We can, but it's not from sun exposure, which is interesting. That's a whole other roundtable on skin cancer in brown skin, but it's not usually from sun exposure. Another effect of this very efficient filter is we make less vitamin D in our skin because you need sunlight to penetrate the skin in order to make vitamin D. And we're going to talk about that shortly. So what does all of this mean right? We have a great filter. What does this mean for us when it comes to sun exposure and sun protection? Well, let's talk a little bit about the sun first. So the sun emits two types of light: ultraviolet A light or UVA light and ultraviolet B light, UVB. The majority of the light that reaches us on the earth is UVB. But UVA actually is very interesting. It goes deeper into the skin than UVB. So it actually passes your epidermis and goes down into the dermis where all of your nice collagen is, that's keeping your skin nice and young and tight. And it breaks that collagen down. So UVA is responsible for skin aging. Another interesting thing about UVA light, this is the type of light that can flare lupus. We'll talk about this briefly later on. If you have lupus, you really have to protect your skin from the sun because the ultraviolet A will literally wake the lupus up. It's very interesting and we don't fully understand why. And UVA also can interact with some medications to make you more sensitive to the sun, and it can cause rashes because of the medication and its interaction with UVA light. Another thing about UVA, it comes right through your window, through your car window, your office window. So sometimes I'm talking to patients about hyperpigmentation on their face, and I ask them, do they wear sunscreen? And they say, well, no, I'm indoors all the time. I work from home, but they sit by a window. Well, they're getting ultraviolet A light all day long. So ultraviolet B light, on the other hand, this is the type of sunlight that causes sunburns. And you'll see as we go along this presentation, sunburn equals damage to your skin, including DNA damage, which equals skin cancer. So ultraviolet B light is responsible for causing skin cancers. And the people who get skin cancers are generally the people who get sunburns. So it doesn't matter what color skin you have. If you are getting sunburns, you are at risk for skin cancer. We'll get into that soon. And then UVB is what helps us create vitamin D in the skin. And the way it does that is your skin has this chemical within it called 7-dehydrocholesterol, and the sun interacts with this chemical and it creates vitamin D. But you can see here, there are other ways that you can get vitamin D. Because our skin is filtering that sunlight out, we're just not going to make as much, or it may take longer, more sun exposure to make the amount we need. Plus, if you are wearing sunscreen on top of your skin, if you're wearing, you're covering up your skin a lot, you're just not going to make as much vitamin D. And so it's going to be important to get your vitamin D from your diet or from supplements. And you can see some sources of vitamin D here. Dairy products, fatty fish like mackerel and sardines are great sources. Milk, including plant-based milks, tend to be fortified with vitamin D. It's a really important vitamin for many, many functions in the body. And it's actually been, the studies are mixed, but it has been linked with higher levels of vitamin D lower levels of vitamin D seem to be associated with certain cancers. The studies are not great, but there is a signal in the data. So I say all this to say that sun exposure in moderation is a good thing, especially if you have melanin in your skin, you have a natural filter already. Sun improves your mood. It boosts your vitamin D production. You need that vitamin D. And we often associate sun exposure with good things, fun, family, friends, vacations, cookouts, etc. And this is, me here, 3 generations, my mom, my son, and I taking a walk on the beach. And I'm going to show you that I walk the walk. I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk about sun and sun protection. So what are my tips for safer sun exposure? I think getting sun is fun. I think we should actually seek some sun in the summertime, but there's some things to do. Things you could do to sort of ameliorate how much you're getting. You can wear hats and sunglasses. A hat is what we call physical sun protection. It is better than any sunscreen you can wear. It physically blocks the light from touching your skin. You can wear a nice cute visor. You see, I got that cute visor from Amazon there. Not too bad. The sunglasses helps protect your eyes from too much ultraviolet light. And then you can cover some of your skin. So here's my son on the beach here. When he was in the water, we took that little shirt off and he can run around in the water. But when he wasn't in the water and just walking around, we put the shirt back on just to cover up a little bit more skin so he's not getting a sun exposure on so much of his body surface area. And here you can see we're gardening. When we're gardening, we try to do that in the morning, and I'll tell you why. But he's wearing short sleeve, so he wore long pants, and he's not wearing a hat. So, we're just trying to, balance out how much of your skin you're exposing to the light. Certainly, you can seek shade. If you're sitting under an umbrella or under a tent or standing under a tree, you're still getting ultraviolet light. You're still going to make some vitamin D, but it's not going to be direct sunlight. And so it might be a little easier on your skin. And then the ultraviolet rays are strongest between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. So it's really much safer to get sunlight before 10 a.m. or after 3 p.m., which is why we tend to do our little gardening in the morning. If you're going to be out and about for a long time and you're going to have sun exposure for a prolonged period of time on more of your body surface area, then consider wearing sunscreen. I actually recommend wearing sunscreen on your face and neck on most days, if only to prevent skin aging and dyspigmentation. With sunscreen, in order for it to be truly effective, technically you have to reapply it every 2 to 3 hours. I'm not sure how many people actually do that, but you need to reapply it every 2 to 3 hours. And after, if you sweat profusely or if you go swimming, the sunscreen's gone. You do need to reapply it at that time. So people often ask, what's the best sunscreen? And for me, the best sunscreen is the one that you'll actually use. Sunscreen comes in so many different forms, and some of them rub in nicely, some of them do not. Some of them feel greasy to people. So you really just have to try different ones and use the one that you like enough to actually put on every day. And there are 2 types of sun protection. You have physical sun protection and you have chemical sun protection. Physical sun protection, we talked about that in the last slide. Your hats, you might wear long sleeves, umbrellas, but there are actually types of sunscreen that give you physical protection. They're called mineral sunscreens, and they contain ingredients that basically form a layer over the skin that the sun cannot penetrate, but they don't interact with the chemistry of your skin at all. The molecules are too big to penetrate into the skin. And those ingredients are zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. And then you have chemical sunscreens. So chemical sunscreens have other ingredients like avobenzone, oxybenzone, you'll see written on the back of the bottle. And there's some recent controversies about the safety and the environmental impact of chemical sunscreens. So let me share this study that was done just a couple of years ago with you. Basically, the FDA has been a little concerned that the ingredients in chemical sunscreens like avobenzone might have some endocrine disrupting ability, meaning they might interact with the hormones in your body. And previous studies have shown that when people apply sunscreen, sometimes you can find those ingredients in the blood later on. So suggesting that we are absorbing them into our system. So they did this study here with just 48 participants, so not a big study, just in one location in Wisconsin. So maybe not very, cannot be generalizable in some settings. But interestingly, half of the participants were Black and half were white, which is not something we see very often. So I think they did a good job of really trying to recruit people across the spectrum of skin tones. And what they did is they broke them up into 4 groups, gave them different types of sunscreen, so lotion, spray, etc. But they all had the same ingredients. And then they drew their blood periodically for 21 days to see if they would find the sunscreen ingredients in the blood. And they did. They found avobenzone specifically in the blood of everyone in the study at various levels, depending on how the sunscreen was applied. So it seemed as though the sprays had less absorption and the lotions had more, maybe because the lotions stay in contact with the skin longer, unsure. But you can see here that the safe limit for avobenzone in the blood is 0.5 nanograms, and they found levels as high as 7 nanograms in some of the participants. So what does this mean? Well, we're not sure. Because they found it in the blood doesn't mean it's doing anything bad. That's one argument. I don't know. I'm not sure that I would want this in my blood. But having said that, I do use a chemical sunscreen on my face every day, but I don't put it on my son. So for now, because people are concerned about this, there's been some press about it, I just recommend using mineral sunscreens when you can. And remember, the ingredients for mineral sunscreens are zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, and iron oxide. The problem with some of these sunscreens is they weren't really created for us initially. And so they are, zinc oxide, you find zinc oxide in diaper cream. It's that white pasty material. And so these sunscreens tend to leave this grayish or whitish color on our skin, like this. Nobody's walking around looking like this all summer, right? But some of them do rub in quite nicely. They really are working on making these more acceptable to people with brown skin. So here are a couple that I've used the one on the left and like it very much. The other 2, my residents have told me are excellent, and I've tried it on the back of my hand and it did rub in very nicely. But as I said before, you kind of have to just try it and see how you like it, how it rubs in on your skin. Now, just a little pro tip, computer screens and phones and iPads emit something called blue light. I know we talked a lot about this during the pandemic because so many people were on their screens. And blue light can also cause pigmentation issues in the skin. And so sunscreens that contain iron oxide, they block ultraviolet light and blue light. So those are preferable, especially for people who already are having pigmentary issues like the melasma that I showed you earlier, or post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. And one tip to figure out if a sunscreen has iron oxide in it is usually to look for this word, tinted. If it says tinted, it usually has iron oxide, and the liquid itself is usually brown. And many liquid foundations that are made for people with brown skin actually have iron oxide in them because iron oxide is a reddish pigment. And so they use it to create the brown color in some of your foundations. So you're probably using iron oxide without even knowing it. Now, there are some special circumstances for sun sensitivity. I've been pretty loose with my sun recommendations, right? You have melanin, you have a great filter, go ahead and get some sun exposure and make that vitamin D. But UV exposure can make some medical conditions worse. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have lupus or some of the other connective tissue diseases, you really do need to avoid the sun as much as you can. It doesn't mean you shouldn't go outside and enjoy the summertime, but you do need to wear those physical sun blockers, hats, long sleeves, and your sunscreen. Another medical condition to be wary of, so people who are living with HIV, some of them can become more sensitive to sun and more likely to get sunburns as well. And then some medications make your skin more sensitive to ultraviolet light and make you more likely to get a sunburn. And remember, I said a sunburn equals skin damage or DNA damage, which increases your risk for skin cancer. So we don't want sunburns. So some blood pressure medications like hydrochlorothiazide can make you sensitive to the sun. Some antibiotics, doxycycline, Cipro, that people use for UTIs, and even some of the medicines we give for acne as dermatologists can make patients more sensitive to the sun. Some other special circumstances when it comes to sun sensitivity, some herbs can make you more sensitive to the sun. St. John's wort, which is sometimes used, people use it over the counter to treat depression and mood disturbances. That can make you exquisitely sensitive to the sun. And then the essential oils from citrus, so lime, lemon, orange, etc. You can actually get a wicked sunburn if you apply any of these essential oils on your skin and then get sun exposure. You don't even need the essential oil. All you have to do is squeeze a lime or a lemon into that margarita this summer, and you let that lime juice stay on your skin and the sun hits it, and you can get a really wicked sunburn. We see it most summers. We see at least one at Howard. And if you have brown skin, it leaves behind this intense dark spot that lasts for years sometimes. So if you're out there and you're making margaritas, run inside, wash your hands when you're done before you get sun exposure. So to finish up here with sun protection and sun exposure, regardless of your skin color, regardless of the depth of your pigment and the amount of melanin that you have to listen to your body. If you tend to get a sunburn or you exhibit any other signs of sun sensitivity, which we'll talk about, just wear sunscreen and protect yourself from the sun in the ways that we talked about. You really want to try to avoid sunburns at all costs. And sunburns, in people with lighter skin, that may look like redness, but in people with brown skin, you don't always get red. It can be tingling of the skin, it could be itching, or your skin feels a little swollen after sun exposure. God forbid you get blisters after sun exposure. If you have a lot of melanin in your skin and you are having these symptoms, that is just how a sunburn can present in you. And you should consider seeing a dermatologist to discuss this sun sensitivity, because technically it shouldn't be happening. So we would want to investigate to make sure that there isn't something else going on, a medication or lupus or something, before settling on the fact that maybe you're just sensitive to the sun. All right. Maybe I'll pause here for a second to see if anybody had any burning questions in the chat, or you can unmute if you have any burning sun questions. We'll have time at the end for questions as well. I think I saw Dr. Kindred join us. Hi, Dr. Kindred, thanks for coming. We already told them to get excited about your presentation next month. All right, so let's move on to our second item for tonight. Let's talk about sweating. So there are two main things that stimulate your sweat glands. One really pertains to us tonight as we're talking about summertime, which is high temperature. And you sweat when the ambient temperature is high, because sweating cools your body. But also emotions. So people sweat in response to fear, stress, pain. Some people sweat when they're laughing. Some people sweat when they're eating. And there are other things that cause sweating too. Some medications, certainly hot flashes, infections, thyroid dysfunction, etc. But for our purposes tonight, we're going to talk about temperature and sweat. And here is just to remind you about our structure and function section. Here is your sweat gland. It's in the dermis of the skin, so in that second layer. And it has this little passageway called a duct, where the sweat being produced in the gland gets transported up the duct and onto your skin surface in order to cool your body. So sweat, it's our friend in general, right? It keeps your body temperature normal. There are diseases, dermatologic diseases, where people do not sweat. And those people are in trouble. They are at risk for overheating. They can't enjoy outdoor activities that you and I do. So you want to be able to sweat. Sweat also it actually hydrates your skin. It puts water and electrolytes into your epidermis, onto the surface of the epidermis. So people who don't sweat, they tend to have dry skin. It actually makes your fingers more sensitive to touch, especially for fine tasks. And we even eliminate some medications or even some drugs of abuse through the sweat. So your body uses that as a way to get rid of things that it doesn't want as well. But our friend, sweat can also cause some problems. If you are sweating excessively, you can become dehydrated and you can lose electrolytes because sweat is not water. It's an electrolyte solution. So it's basically salt or sodium chloride, potassium, bicarbonate. They're dissolved in water and then excreted as sweat. Sweat itself doesn't have an odor, but when it comes out onto the skin, the bacteria on your skin can break down the sweat. You have all kinds of things in sweat. You have proteins and immunoglobulins, which are like immune cells. It can break those, the bacteria can break those things down and create smelly substances. And then another thing that sweat creates, remember we talked about the fact that it hydrates your skin. Well, if you're sweating a lot, then you're overhydrating the skin. You can get too much moisture, especially in the skin folds. So under the breast, under the belly, etc. And that sets up a really good environment for yeasts. And you can get yeast infections of the skin, you can get irritation and chafing and so on. So what are my tips for excessive sweating in the summertime? Well, the obvious one is seek a cooler environment. I wanted to say to share this one specifically because, of course, we all have access. Most of us have access to air conditioning. But there were these really interesting studies done showing that fans are actually much more efficient cooling devices than ACs. So if you're outside, you know it's going to be hot, take a fan with you. It just moves the air past your body. And so that helps the sweat that's on your body to evaporate faster. And it's that act of evaporation that cools you down. You want to replenish your water and your electrolytes. Remember, salt is an electrolyte solution. Sweat, is an electrolyte solution. So you're losing water, but you're also losing sodium, potassium, magnesium, etc. Have you ever wondered why you go to, say, a cookout and you're out there for a few hours, you're sweating, when you get home, you're exhausted? Some of it is because you're just depleted of all of these electrolytes that you need to kind of make your body run. So how do you replenish electrolytes? Well, some drinks have electrolytes in them, Gatorade, for example, Powerade, those types of drinks. And some brands of water will actually put electrolytes within the water itself. They usually cost a lot of money. But food contains electrolytes. So, if you're out there at the cookout, fruits contain electrolytes. Actually, cantaloupe has more sodium than any other fruit for some reason. It's not a lot of sodium where you'll be worried about your blood pressure, but it has enough sodium to actually help replenish your electrolytes. Avocados, bananas have a lot of potassium, nuts have magnesium, and that bowl of chips out there at the cookout, hey, you get some sodium. You will actually hydrate faster if you get a little bit of sodium and water. I just wanted to beat this horse a little bit longer. So this little cartoon, I think, describes it well, about why you need to ingest water and replenish your electrolytes when you're sweating a lot. If you think of your blood as this solution of the electrolytes mixed with water, and you've depleted both of those, and then you replace it with water alone. You see people walking around with this big thing of water, right? You replete it with water alone, your blood actually gets too dilute. So it has more water than electrolytes. And so what happens? Your body's trying to bring that balance back. So it's going to send you to the bathroom over and over and over. And I don't know about you, I don't want to use a porta potty at the park. So I'm drinking water, a little bit of water, and maybe having some grapes and trying to balance that out so that you're not going to the bathroom every 15 minutes. Some more tips for sweating. So if you wear sweat wicking or moisture wicking clothing. So if you go to the store, they're actually marketing clothes in this way now, where these fabrics are designed to basically take moisture that's on your skin, absorb the moisture, and then pass it into the air very quickly. So that way your skin doesn't stay wet. So if you get moisture wicking clothing, that helps you not hold on to moisture. Now, 100% cotton is not moisture wicking. It stays wet. So cotton absorbs sweat and then it just stays wet and it keeps that moisture against your skin. So that's not always a great fabric to use in the summer. If you wear loose clothing that allows air to flow between your clothing and your body, that's kind of like the fan concept where you're moving air so it takes the sweat and evaporates it and helps you to stay cool. And then just a pro tip, there's a material that you could buy online. I think it's on Amazon. It's not cheap. It's called Interdry. And you could buy a roll, a large roll. It comes almost like foil, the way the foil is packaged. And you can buy this huge roll. Unfortunately, it's $70, but this roll would last you a lifetime. You pull the roll and you can cut a strip of this cloth and you can put it under your breast. So like between the bra and the breast, you can put it under the belly, any areas that you're having a lot of excess moisture. And it does the same thing. It takes the moisture away from the skin, wicks it through the fabric out to the air. It works really, really well. And when you come home, you take it off, wash it by hand and hang it to dry, and you can reuse it. It's a great product. If you're getting irritation though, in the folds of the body, feel free to see a provider, whether it's your dermatologist or your primary care doctor. They can prescribe anti-yeast creams or even sometimes mild steroid creams to help with the irritation. So in summary, I would say summer is a gift. You know, get outside, enjoy it, get a little sun exposure. Sun exposure in moderation is good for your physical and your mental health. But if you have certain health conditions, if you take certain medications that we talked about, you need to be more careful. Use sun protection. Remember, hats, clothing, shade, they are excellent forms of sun protection and in some ways more effective than sunscreen. And if you're going to pick a sunscreen and you want to avoid the concerns of the chemical sunscreens, just stick with the mineral sunscreen, SPF 30 or higher. Remember to reapply it every few hours, especially if you went swimming or if you sweat a lot. You would have gotten rid of it in the water. Remember that sweat is good. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's there to cool us down. Just hydrate with water and electrolytes and try to find sweat wicking clothing to keep your skin dry. So with that, I'll end, and I'm sure we have a good bit of time for your questions. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Okoye. That was a great deal of information. And I dare say I kept flipping back and forth between the questions that had been submitted prior to this evening and their presentation. And a lot of the points that you made were addressed, or rather the questions were addressed by the points that you made. So thank you. That was a very comprehensive presentation. We did have some people joining us late. I can reassure you that this presentation, just like all of the others, is being videotaped, and we will share this presentation in its entirety with you. The link, all of the links go up on our YouTube page, and we will drop that link in the chat as well. So I did see a question pop in. Is Ms. Perry still on the line? If you are, could you please come either on mic or on camera, whichever is your preference, and address Dr. Okoye with your question. Nakia Perry?
Yes. Hi, good afternoon,
Welcome.
everybody.
Welcome.
Hi. I had popped in, it had came into my email, so it was a really interesting topic for me because I work in the sun. I'm a mechanic, maintenance mechanic, and I work in the sun all day. And I have lighter skin, and I have it on the side of, like how you were talking about the inner layer of the skin and the small micro microorganisms that pop up on the side of your face. I have those, and I've been trying to get rid of them for like the past 4 years. And trying every skin product and exfoliating and everything, it just won't come out, like you're saying, like sweating or with drinking water and stuff like that. So what do you think? Can you give me a suggestion? What would be the best option moving forward? Because I don't have a dermatologist in Washington, D.C.
Well, now you do. Thank you for your question, Ms. Perry. So the first thing I would say is if you work outside, because what I'm referring to is summer, summer sun exposure, your occasional going to the park or going to a cookout, sitting out with your family. If you are working all day in the sun, that's a little different. That's a lot of sun exposure for anybody. So I would suggest that you use that physical sun protection that we talked about, whether it's a hat or wearing sunscreen every day, or instead of wearing short sleeves, consider wearing something long sleeve to protect you from the sun a little bit more. And do you wear sunscreen now?
Yes, I have the little travel size blue bottle from Target that they have. I spray it on my hands and on my neck at work, and I like spray it in my hands and I dab it on my face, so I don't spray it on my face.
Good. And then remember to reapply it every 2 or 3 hours. And certainly we're happy to see you in the clinic so I could see the spots that you're referring to, because I think it'll be easier for me to make recommendations if I see it. I'll make sure I'll put the number in the chat here.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. That's our appointment line number. I see another
Okoye, is that
question.
clinic located on the campus?
Yes, so we're at Howard University on Georgia Avenue. We are in the Towers building, which is attached to the hospital building. So just come through the hospital and ask for directions, and they'll get you to us. We're on the 4th floor.
Okay, we're just going to put that address in the chat. And in the meantime, we do have another question from Ms. Spicer. Ms. Spicer, if you are able to come on audio or camera, we welcome your question.
Thank you. Thank you. I have been experimenting with moisturizer and sunscreen, and I'm trying to figure out what's the appropriate order to apply them to get maximum benefit.
Thank you, Ms. Spicer. That's a great question. I think actually the order that you have it in the chat is the correct order. So I think your instincts are right. You want to put your moisturizer on first. One way to think about it is you want to nourish your skin first. So the first thing that's touching your skin is either your medication that the dermatologist gives you or your nice moisturizer to nourish the skin. Then you put your sunscreen on, and then you can put foundation on. However, I would say it's better to put fewer things on your skin if possible. And many facial moisturizers now have SPF in them. So if you could find a facial moisturizer that you like that already has sunscreen, then you're just putting that one layer on and then your foundation. Another tip to make it even less complicated, if your foundation, if you have brown skin and you're wearing a brown foundation that has iron oxide in it that we talked about earlier, that is a sunscreen. So you technically could put on a moisturizer and then your foundation, and then you probably have quite a bit of sun protection that way.
Thank you. I have one more thing to add to that. I also have a lot of sensitivity to smells, which is the problem with finding the sunscreen and the moisturizer together. Do you have any comments about that?
Yes, no, so that is a really important point. So unfortunately, many skincare products have fragrance in them, and people are sensitive to fragrance either through the smell of the fragrance or the actual fragrance chemical itself can be irritating to the skin. And things that say they are unscented actually have a masking fragrance. They have a fragrance that masks the medicine-like smell. So you have to look for things that are fragrance-free. And I'll put that in the chat. Unscented means nothing. Fragrance-free is what you're looking for. So I'm gonna put this in here. There are some brands that are better known for creating products that are better for people with sensitive skin. One of those brands is called Vanicream. I have no relationship with these companies, guys, but just want to give you practical advice. Vanicream, Aveeno tends to make products, Dove, they tend to make products for people with sensitive skin, with eczema, that sort of thing. So you're looking for fragrance-free and these specific brands that do a little bit of a better job of addressing that. Thank you for your question.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Dr. Okoye, this is Karen again. I'm off screen because I am looking through the questions that were submitted online, and there was one question about whether your windshield is able to protect you from UV rays. So that is while you're driving. Does your windshield provide any UV protection?
Well, I shouldn't say no. Yes and no. It blocks UVB light, but it does not block UVA light. And so UVB light is the one that causes skin cancer and sunburns, but UVA is the one that can cause skin aging and interact with your medications and lupus and so on. If you tint your windows, the legal limit of the tint actually blocks over 90-something% of UVA. So tinted windows do a little bit better, but of course your windshield isn't going to be tinted. So that's why for people with pigmentary issues or people who have to be very careful with the sun, we always tell them when you wake up in the morning, go ahead and just put that sunscreen on. Even if you're going to be indoors, even if you're just jumping in the car to go to the supermarket, you're going to get some UVA light.
Thank you very much. And I think that leads us to the next question. It may have to be the last. If you have others, we can go over a little bit of time, but I'm looking at the time, it's about 7:30. But we did have a number of questions about hyperpigmentation, dark spots. How best would you recommend people handle dark spots on darker skin?
Mm-hmm. So this is something we do all day, every day at Howard because it's such an impressive concern in our patient population. Again, I showed you how much melanin we have, and that melanin does all kinds of things. Couple of things. One is we try to figure out what is the cause of the hyperpigmentation because there are many different types. And so if you're getting hyperpigmentation from breakouts, like acne breakouts, well, the first thing we want to do is treat that acne so that you're not constantly getting that inflammation in your skin and making new dark spots. If it's something like melasma, we do the same. So that's the first part. Why are you getting these spots? Let's work on that. The second aspect of treatment for hyperpigmentation is sun protection. For the same reason we've been talking about for the past hour or so. You want to block the sun from stimulating those melanocytes more. You want to quiet it down while you're trying to fade the dark spots. So that's part 2. And in part 3 is there are some medications that can actually fade the dark spots. Of course, you have bleaching creams, and there are many, many issues with bleaching creams. And so we are very judicious in how we use those. But there are also medicines called retinoids that we use a lot for acne. And one is now over the counter. It's called Differin. Differin and the other retinoids very slowly, but very organically treat hyperpigmentation. Remember I said that the skin regenerates itself every 4 weeks or so. Well, the retinoids help you to sort of speed that up. And you kind of, replace that those pigmented skin cells a little bit faster. Some other tips, products that contain certain ingredients tend to work a little bit better for pigmentation. Vitamin C serums tend to help with pigmentation, and moisturizers that have the ingredient niacinamide also work well for hyperpigmentation.
Thank you. That was very, very helpful. And I think with this last question, I don't want anybody to feel placed on the spot here, but we were asked whether there were any clinics in DC or the surrounding areas that accept Medicaid.
That's a really important question. This is something that I have based my entire career on, the fact that access to dermatologic care is limited to certain segments of our population. And we just do not believe that that's right. So from a health justice perspective, I am working on the advocacy side to improve that and to encourage my colleagues to accept all types of insurance and to train residents who will go out into the world and do the same. But okay, let me get off my soapbox. We accept Medicaid at Howard. Generally, in university settings, we'll accept Medicaid. So we accepted, I believe GW accepts certain types of Medicaid, and I believe MedStar Georgetown as well, but I think they accept fewer types of Medicaid.
So it's dependent on the type that you have. It's not an across the board.
At Howard, it is across the board. If you do not have insurance, we will see you at Howard. We would have to make arrangements. We will see. We are here to give access to dermatologists for you.
I think that that's a good place to put a pin in the discussion. Dr. Okoye, I can't thank you enough. We've had people coming in and out of the chat. I understand that there were some students who came in. Again, not to worry. We will provide this video in very short order in follow-up for everyone who's been on this call. And even if you've missed it, if you would like to find out a little bit more about these types of talks, which we try to do at least once a month. Again, this is part one of a two-part mini-series that we have on the protection of our skin and hair. Dr. Okoye was fabulous enough to recommend a colleague of hers who I think might still be with us. And she is going to be one of our guest speakers for next week. I don't think I see her in here.
Yeah, she had to jump.
She had to go, but I think that we have a slide coming up that tells us a little bit about what's upcoming. So on June 15th, which is just about a month from today, we will hear from Dr. Shoshana Kindred, who will talk to us about hair care and healing. And we met with her just recently, and she is going to bring some special guests with her. I'm not allowed to say yet who they are, but if you join us and you sign up on our email, and our email address we will be posting in the chat, mahalo to Hawaii. We will send you out that invitation, and we really encourage you. There were those of you who joined us this evening. We're really glad that you could spend the time with us, but you can also spread this information around. If you get an invitation, be certain to share it. I mean, for those of you who have hair, if you're losing hair, if you have hair troubles, if you don't have hair, you'll still be included in this conversation that's taking place next month. So please do come. And then one other announcement that we have is that we were honored to be invited by Dr. Melissa Clark, who is one of our partners here at RCMI, to co-host a conversation. So we will be doing a joint community wellness roundtable and excuse me, doctor call, hopefully once a month, and we will be starting next month. That is going to happen on Monday evenings, a little bit later on because some of the hosts are on the West Coast. But our very first one will be on Monday, June 19th or Juneteenth. We are going to have a conversation about Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. And we have some really special guests that we're lining up for that as well. So with that said, we have a busy month coming up. We're very grateful that you could have joined us this evening. Thank you so much. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. at rcmi-cec@howard.edu. And with that, we'll close out for the evening. Thank you again very much to Dr. Okoye for lending your time and expertise to our conversation. Thank you to everyone who assisted in the production of this call this evening, and of course to each and every one of you for being a part of the dialogue. Thank you so very much. We wish you a pleasant evening and see you very soon. Bye-bye now.